Welcome back to my channel, everyone. For those of you who are new, please watch the video and decide whether or not you like to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment and share the video if you'd like. But those of you who are returning, thank you for continuing this series with me. And now we are moving on to part 3 of my beginner's guide for Gundam. So obviously this is for people who are completely new to this franchise, and you don't know a whole lot about it. This is part 3, and we're going to move on to a starting place where you should begin with the Gundam animes. This is going to be a little bit more choice-based than the other 2 videos. But again, before you watch part 3, you should check out part 1 and part 2 if you haven't. It'll give you a better idea of what we're talking about and what you are working with here. But just remember, part 2 is pretty long. It's almost an hour. So just keep that in mind. And now we are going to move on to part 3, a starting place. So the first place to start, I personally believe, of course, would be the Universal Century. Now, there are 2 ways to watch the Universal Century. Way 1 is going to be, or style 1, I should say, is going to be the original Gundam style, which is considered the release order. Now, this style is obviously going to be watching the franchise from the original show, and you watch it in order of release. So instead of watching the next thing, which would be in story order, you watch Zeta Gundam because it came out in '85. Then you'd move on to Double Zeta, and then so on and so forth, and you watch everything in that order. You can, of course, stop when you finish the last Universal Century thing before it moves on to multiverse stuff, and of course you can skip over spin-off stuff and all that. You can just skip over those things and go to the next Universal Century thing, but I'll get to that in a minute. So yeah. Style 2 is going to be the Origins style, which is what I call it, but it's technically the chronological order of the story. So there you would start with the earliest show, which is technically going to be Origins. Even though Unicorn has a few scenes that take place in the year Universal Century 0, I guess you could say it's that, or Universal Century 1. But the show itself doesn't take place there, so you don't really have to watch it first. You would start with Origins and then move your way through, but you watch everything in story order, which means you would have to do stuff like stop your show, stop watching the original, jump over to other things like War in the Pocket and stuff like that, 8th MS Team, MS Igloo, and watch those shows whenever their story comes up in order, but you can, of course, just finish the show, then start those, and then go back to the next major show. And then, of course, once you get done with a bunch of those, you have 83 Stardust Memory, which then goes into Zeta, and then, of course, Double Zeta. So you're obviously, in that way, it's a little bit more complicated, but you're watching it in story order, so you might get a little bit more nuance and understanding from it. The only problem with doing that, though, is that you're going to start off with something that's really new with Origins, and then you're going to go from that to 79. So you're going to be jumping way back in time to watch the first Gundam show, and that's going to hurt your experience a little bit, and you're also going to see some inconsistencies between the two. Because technically the Origins is based off of the manga from 2000, which is an entire remake of the original show, but in manga form. Sadly, they don't have a anime form of that in the entirety. They don't have a remake of it. All they have is the prequel story that's in Origins before the original starts. I don't know why they did that. I really, really wanted Origins to be a complete remake of the original show, but unfortunately, it wasn't. So you're going to have some problems with it. Some things won't line up correctly, but that's to be expected with a franchise that's just this huge and this old. There's always going to be things that don't line up perfectly, but you can overlook it when you're a pretty huge fan, so it's not a big deal. But when you're first starting off, it might be a little confusing to do it in chronological order. So that's that. Obviously, my personal suggestion would be release order, but that's just me. And I'll get to the other ones in a second. I just want to make sure you understand that you can choose what you want to do here, just so you know. And then, of course, there's going to be styles uh, 3, and 4, which are just going to be starting off in the alternate universe shows. Now, this is something that some people suggest, and honestly, it has its merits, but it also has its downsides. And the merits are that, yes, you don't technically have to have the biggest, you don't have to have any knowledge actually of Gundam to watch the alternate universe shows, because that's the point. They were meant for people to get started there and then move over to Universal Century. But unfortunately, there's so many of these shows now that it's going to make things even more confusing the more that they add. So you can start here if you want, and you can just keep watching alternate universe shows until you've finished them all. And then you can move on to the spin-offs, or you can move on to the Universal Century stuff. Again, entirely up to you. But basically, you have your own styles here too. You can do obviously you can do release order, or you can do basically what you want. You can literally pick and choose what show you want to see in the alternate universe, because it doesn't matter. None of them are connected. Clearly, if they have the same name but slightly different, like Seed and Seed of Destiny, obviously those are connected. But it's pretty obvious to tell which one comes first. But most of the time, it's either just a show or it's a movie and a show, and that's really all you have for that universe. So it's not too hard to figure out where how you want to proceed in that area. So you really only have two choices: either complete random or in release order. Again, that's up to you. Style 4 is going to be the spin-offs and parodies. Now, this, of course, is going to include build fighters, or in my categorization, it includes build fighters because it has SDs and it's a kid's show. So to me, it means spin-off. But because of this, if you was to watch build fighters first or something in that nature, it's heavily dependent on your knowledge of previous Gundam shows to understand a lot of the references. Because Build Fighters really started off as like a celebration of all things Gunpla and the community itself. And while it's definitely blossomed into its own franchise with Build Divers and all that, the first two are huge reference shows. They're just full of references. They're just everywhere. Characters in the background, characters in the foreground, certain lines of dialogue that are being said, certain characters that are clearly meant to represent another character from another show, but here they're a different person. There's just references everywhere, and it's insane. But if you've seen everything up to this point, you'll understand everything. You'll get it. But if you start off with it, it's going to be different because you're not going to enjoy it as much as if you've already seen everything before. So you can start with spin-off shows, but a lot of it is reliant on your prior knowledge and if you can understand the jokes and stuff that they're making or references that they're making. If you can't, your enjoyment of the show is going to go a lot further downhill than somebody else who has a much bigger knowledge of the franchise. You don't have to know everything. You can enjoy the show for what it is, which is basically just a shonen, but it's really good. It is a good show in my opinion. Of course, everyone's entitled to their own opinions on the show, but you can start here if you want, but that's up to you. Just so you know, you might not get the same amount of enjoyment since you haven't seen everything that comes before. So, with everything that's been discussed so far in this video, I know it's pretty short, honestly. It's probably not going to be that long of a video. But really, I just needed to go over the different styles of shows. Not styles of shows, but styles of watching the shows and how you can watch them. And then I'm going to, of course, give you my recommendation here at the end, just like I do when I do my Gunpla videos. So, when it comes to recommending this franchise for beginners and how I suggest you watch it, again, you can choose what you want to do, but this, of course, is just going to be my opinion on it. I think the best thing to do is to watch it in release order, but not just Universal Century. Release order for the entire franchise. So as you're watching, once you hit, Double Zeta, the next thing's going to be SD Gundam. Well, then you have to switch over to SD Gundam and watch that because you're experiencing it the way a hardcore, or not even a hardcore fan, but just how a Japanese fan would experience it throughout their life. If they were around in 79 and are still around today, they would have experienced it that way. And because you live much further in the future, you can watch the entirety of the franchise and probably get it done within about 2 to 3 years, depending on how willing you are to marathon a lot of shows that have a decent amount of episodes. They're not too long. Most of them are only 50 episodes. And for a lot of people, that's a lot of episodes, but really that was average for back in the day. So it's really not that long. Anything past 50 episodes, I would consider to be a long show. But the individual shows themselves are not long. What's long is how the franchise has stayed alive for all these different generations. It's been around for a while. So, of course, there's going to be a lot to watch. But if you really get into it by watching the first show and slowly progressing when it comes to release order, you can see how the franchise shifted its focuses and stuff throughout the years. And you can kind of follow that. And, of course, you can make up your own decisions and determinations on whether you liked the way it went or you wish they would have gone a different direction, because you're going to see things that pop up when you watch it in release order, and then you're going to be like, well, hey, how come nothing came of this? Well, it's because of this show. And you're like, oh yeah, I watched that. That makes sense. Now I understand why that happened, or why we never got this, or why we still haven't got it. Like Crossbone Gundam. Just saying, Bandai, maybe you should make it. Regardless, the point is that you're going to experience it the way it had been experienced with release order. You're going to be watching it the way it was meant to be watched. If you do it in any of the other styles, you're not watching it technically, I believe, in the correct way, because you're either choosing story over experience, which is, in my opinion, the release order, which is the experience version, that's what I would call it. You're prioritizing story. And, some of the shows might disappoint you if you do that. But if you watch it for the experience, when you get to some of those shows that might disappoint you in the story, you might really enjoy the experience of the characters, or the animation or something along those lines. There's always usually something with every show that you could like. But if you watch it in, but only if you watch it in release order are you really going to experience that. If you watch it out of that order in any of the other styles I mentioned, 2, 3, or 4, you're not going to experience it the way you probably want to. You're thinking you're getting that experience, but you're not. You're getting a different one. Because you either have story being prioritized, or you have the fear of missing out and not understanding what's happening, which of course would be jumping over to style 3 so you can experience it the way you want. And then of course, if you want to start off with style 4 and watch the spin-off stuff, you're going to be missing out on a lot of context to certain scenes or poses or characters or whatever that will just fly over your head, and you won't get why they're focusing on that in that scene. So there's going to be a lot of things that just won't make sense if you start off there. But with the other styles, you're just not going to get the full experience. There's always going to be something missing. And that's why I think that the release order is the best experience for beginners. That's all. That's entirely up to you. You don't have to agree with me. You don't even have to watch it like that. You can do any of the other styles if you want. But just keep in mind, that's how I watched it. I watched it in release order. So I started with the 1979 show, and I just kept looking at the dates of when they were released and realized that this came first. So I have to jump over to spin-off shows. And then once I get done with this, I could go back to Universal Century. And then this came out, and then this, and this, and this, and then this came out, and this was the first alternate universe show. So now I'm jumping into those types of shows. And, eventually it gets pretty confusing. It does, because you have to jump all over the place. But if you just look up a list of when they came out, you can keep it pretty straight and just move on to the next show when you get done. And that's what's made me such a huge Gundam fan, because I've had, in my opinion, the best way to watch the show was just do it in the order it came out. And I have this mentality because I've heard other anime fans say, especially older fans who've been around for at least, 10, 15 years. They say, basically, there's no place better to start watching an anime than the beginning. And of course, that would be the original show. So why not start there? And that's what I did. So that's what I would recommend for everybody, really, but also for beginners. You can choose what you think would be best for you, but that's my recommendation. And there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button if you desire. Hit the notification bell if you do subscribe, and share the video. Leave a comment if you're willing. And this has been Yokai, and I'm going to be out of here.